Boko Haram killings seem to be on the rise yet again. At least 30 people were killed in Nigeria's northeastern Borno region recently. Last month, 4 soldiers were killed and several injured when jihadists attacked troops in Auno. Senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, Akinolo Alojo, joins us now via Skype from Pretoria to discuss this. Are we seeing Boko Haram on the rise, and if so, why?
Thank you for having me. It's quite unfortunate that the situation has actually gotten really worse. I think we're seeing a rise in terms of the attacks of the group, and bearing in mind that we're not just dealing with Boko Haram, we're dealing with also the breakaway faction, which is the Islamic State West Africa province in northeast Nigeria. And we may recall that the Global Terrorism Index, a report which was published just late last year, actually listed Boko Haram as among the 4 deadliest terror groups, and so we see the data showing the high frequency in attacks, the attacks on civilians, on troops, on military bases, on infrastructure, and it's something which I think might even get worse, except certain measures are put in place and with a sense of urgency.
But there is no sense of urgency, is there? I mean, Buhari, when he came into power in 2015, said he's going to put a stop to this. That hasn't happened. Is it because the area in which they mainly operate is pretty marginalized, on the fringes?
That's a very good point. That is one reason. It's a part of the country in the northern region which for decades has been marginalized. But then, of course, we also know that there are other parts of the country and across Africa where we have populations or communities that are also affected by poverty, by governance gaps, leadership gaps. But then we don't see the same level of violence taking place there. So it raises the question of what else? So we're not just talking about governance gaps. We're talking about the ideological aspect of this crisis. We're talking about the lack of engagement of the government with local communities. We're looking at the use of intelligence and the timely use of it, or the lack of that. We're looking at issues of how to perhaps engage the private sector. And just last year, mid last year actually, we all saw the summit, the high-level UN summit, which held in Nairobi, and the UN Secretary General, who talked about this worsening trend of terrorism, not only in the Lake Chad Basin, but also in the Horn of Africa and also in the Sahel. So it's something which has multiple factors, that explain why we're seeing a rise.
And obviously it's something that needs to be dealt with at grassroots level as well. I mean, the barbarity here. Do you remember those 276 girls, I think it was 2014, that were kidnapped? Many of them are still lost to us with them. And you just wonder, what is their end game here? What is it that they're trying to achieve?
Indeed. I mean, that's a very good reminder. We remember the Chibok girls who were abducted back in 2014, like you rightly said. Basically, the agenda of Boko Haram and its breakaway faction is to establish its own version of an Islamic government based on how it interprets its own doctrines. That, of course, is not possible in Nigeria because Nigeria is a secular state. The constitution does not operate based on what Boko Haram wants. However, I think if we look more deeply, there might be points or areas where we may need to think more creatively. Perhaps the heavy-handed responses, the military response of the government and of states in general in countering terrorism is not working. We're not seeing the kind of results which communities yearn for. So maybe we need to complement that approach with a mix of other soft approaches. Recently, we saw in Mali, just a few days ago, the president of Mali, Boubacar Keïta, announcing formally that they plan to engage in some kind of political dialogue with terror groups in Mali. And so perhaps maybe we have to consider the option of dialogue. And here at the Institute for Security Studies, we actually published a policy brief that actually outlined certain measures or principles around this issue that may be considered by governments.
I was going to raise that issue about potential dialogue there. I mean, you have to talk, you're losing against them, you've got to talk to them. And I guess the group is being emboldened by what they see as terrorist acts in Mali and other countries that are close to them.
Indeed, that's very true. The group definitely received inspiration from what is happening across the continent and even beyond. We remember even when the former ISIS leader was killed, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, late last year. ISIS and even Al-Qaeda was already having a presence in Africa. We've read statements and heard comments of the former ISIS leader and other leaders across the world, linked to terror groups, that also connect them with what is happening in northern Nigeria and in the Sahel and even in the Horn of Africa. So maybe we have to perhaps begin to engage local communities with a sense of trying to understand these groups more deeply, and also to perhaps identify potential areas of maybe engaging them. Because, like you said, we've tried the military approach for decades. It's not working. And if you look at what even the U.S. itself did in Afghanistan since 2001, for more than 17 years, I think the U.S. even realized that the military approach wasn't working, and there was a sense of trying to reach out to the Taliban. So maybe we need to also adapt that process and see how it works within the context of Nigeria or even the continent in general.
Pretty frightening. Akinolo Olojo, thanks for sharing your expertise with us. Let's check in.